So I wanted to, I mean, one of the reasons I consider this a terrific opportunity is just as Barbara said, these reports, we will both get a good sense of the region and how things are going in terms of press freedom. It's also a good opportunity for me to tell you that we are in the business of training, both in skills and techniques and in ethics, and it goes to all the things Barbara talked about. We found yesterday in our discussion, and we hear it every time we go somewhere, there are ethical questions and reporting questions that come up. Well, here in Trinidad, for example, we had a blackout just a short time ago, and one of the news agencies here put out a report that a bomb had caused the electrical power to go out. And there wasn't really adequate sourcing on that, and some hours later it turned out that the reason the power went off is that there wasn't sufficient fuel in the generator tanks. So it was how did that happen? Well, in our meeting where we were discussing this, we weren't able to really get to the root cause. But what often happens is people don't have enough sourcing, or they don't have sources who really are sources. You know, if you ask me, as soon as the lights go out, what happened, and I say, wow, maybe it was a bomb, I'm not a source, right? And you don't translate that and say, some people said it might have been a bomb. Well, I mean, you know, that's worse than spitting into the wind. And so evaluating sources is one of the things we do when we go out and do a training program. How to get a source. How many sources do you need? Well, some people think you need 2 sources to feel confident. Well, what if that source happens to be the President of the United States? You have to get another source for him to tell you he's going to have lift the sanctions against Iran? Well, you know, who are you going to ask? Because he's the one who's doing the lifting, right? So critical thinking and critical strategic thinking is what you need to be a good reporter, obviously. I mean, Knut and I have worked on so many stories in Jamaica. We had, and I can't tell you how many lunches, and what we were doing is sitting there trying to strategize on what was the story we were all interested in, because often, he for the Financial Times and me for the New York Times, we often were exactly on the same theme, trying to figure out how to do it. And we could talk to each other quite openly without any sense of competition. We were working for publications on the other sides of the ocean, and you know, when it goes through his filter and my filter, by the time it comes out, it's going to be perfectly accurate, but it's going to have his imprint on it or my imprint on it. So there's no question that we can't talk together and work together. And in foreign correspondence, that kind of collective collaboration happens all the time. It is not what the critics say about us, oh, we all hatch up our story and then find out what we're supposed to write and do that. No, we use the power of our combined brains to try to figure out what might be going on, and then we go off and write our stories. I can't tell you how many times I've been out in a car driving around some country with 4 or 5 reporters, all of them competitors, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. We all say, okay, today we need to have 3 diplomats. Oh, we'll go see the Canadians. Let's see, the Germans are pretty good in this country, and of course we'll go see the Americans, who they have special interests here, so they're going to be more aligned probably with the government position. We'll go see all these people. We all are in the same room having the same interviews. Now you go back and read our stories and see what we put in those stories, and it is almost never that the same quotes are used in any of those stories. Once in a while, you'll see 2 or 3 of us use exactly the same quote. Just seems to be perfect and crystallizes the thing. But you can do a lot of collaborative work, and particularly when it comes to freedom of the press. The idea of combining your forces and being able to be a broader, bigger voice than one single voice. So one single island or one single publication might not quite have the clout that the ACM would have, or that when we get the IPI involved. So I am at this moment kind of urging thinking strategically and about working together. I started off in this direction by telling you that we do, our specialty at the University of Miami is obviously what? Teaching people to do things. We get people at all different levels, so we have people from all the fields of journalism, and a lot of them have international experience. And that's the kind of person you want in a workshop who comes out of the United States. You don't want somebody who never left the United States and now who's going to come out here and say, oh my goodness, isn't this curious the way you do things on this little island? You know, just a total insulting, boring, awful way to do it. We have people who've been around and traveled all over the world, done a lot of workshops, and when we don't have exactly the expertise we want in our university, I've been doing it now in the Middle East and Asia and Latin America, so I have contacts at other universities. There's some photography professor at Nebraska who I like very much, who's been going into the what used to be Soviet Union, the stands, in pretty rugged territory with a lot of limitations on press freedom, and teaching ethics and teaching how to operate as a photographer. So he's somebody who would be part of our assets if it's useful to come somewhere and do a workshop. We've been talking just in the short time here of doing 2 or 3 groups here in Port of Spain are interested in workshops, and we're also thinking about perhaps regional ones where we might have something here in Port of Spain and bring people in from Grenada, Guyana, maybe St. Lucia, Barbados, possibly that far. And one of the media companies has said that they'd like to do something like that. Some of the nonprofits, Wesley and I have been talking about, the broadcasters are talking about it. I'm not here to sell training and workshops, but it is something we do. It's something I'm very heartfelt about. It doesn't cost you anything except the expenses of moving the people around. The team doesn't do anything that doesn't seem appropriate to you. So just as Wesley and I talked at great length, and Barbara and Karen and Mr. Lee Singh, Darren, who's keeping his first name from me for some reason. So we talked on the phone, strategized what we wanted. We knew what we do, and we kept it effective. I've heard about these people who say they want to do training, but they have their agendas. They want to shove something down your throat, or they think they know what's better for you. Well, we don't know any of that. All we know is we know how to do it, and whatever you need help with, we can do it. And the question of sourcing and the question of press freedom, these are ethical issues. So you need people who've been in the trenches and done the work, and you need people who know what is the international expectation of press freedom. Now, going into the issue of press freedom, I like the idea of the question of how do you know when press freedom is being eroded? People don't usually hold up a sign and say, okay, that's it for you guys. The show is closed now. Anything you write is going to have to be kind of stenography style. No real reporting allowed here. People are not so obvious when they start to take away our rights. And it's not our rights. We just happen to be out at the front of the spear. It's the rights of the people. That's what press freedom is all about. That's why it's embedded in the United States Constitution. The press freedom idea is to be a counterweight to all the forces that can limit access and freedom for people. It's not that we ourselves have particular white horses and knights in shining armor, but we are the soldiers of the people. We're supposed to make sure that things work right, and they work right because we report on them. If you have anybody here who decides to run his own government or run his own business, he's going to want minimum disclosure because he wants to be in charge of, that's the nature of dictatorship. And we all have a little dictator in ourselves, which is why press is good. When there's sunshine on something, it's hard for it to go bad. So one of the ways it happens is that it becomes a kind of a chilling effect. Instead of people boldly shutting down the press the way Jean-Claude Duvalier would do it, and I must say, even in the day of Jean-Claude in Port-au-Prince, they didn't have signs up saying, you can't do this, you have to submit your material for censorship. It was a little bit, it was even there. You would just say something naughty about the government, and then you wouldn't turn up. They would disappear you, but they wouldn't say, you can't do this. And one of the ways that the press had of writing about dictatorship in Haiti, and they got away with it, was that they would write about dictatorships everywhere else. So they would pick some African country, and they would run wire service stories about that dictator. And you often read these. There's a, what was it called? There was a French publication that I thought did a lot of this. The Nouvelliste, I think it was called. And anyway, you read those stories, and if you thought for a second, you'd say, I see, oh, that's what Jean-Claude is doing. And somehow the government would let you do that. So sometimes when you're really in a bad spot, in a dictatorship, you have to think of kind of what can you do to push the limits of this and still do something that looks like journalism, as opposed to this terrible situation for journalists working on the Mexican-U.S. border, where we heard at a conference of the IFEX, wasn't it? Where were we? We were in Mexico City a couple of years ago. Reporters came in from the border, and we said, well, how do you do your work? Well, in the morning, the drug boss calls me up and tells me what I'll be doing that day. And he tells me who's going to be in the story and what's the nature of it. Well, you know, that's not journalism, right? That's not even public relations. It's sort of like public relations, but it's, you know, it's sort of like stenography.
It's survival.
Yeah, stenography at the end of a gun.
It's survival.
Yeah. So you might think, would I rather be in the Ford Motor Company dealership, or would I rather be selling something? You know, what am I doing here? So yeah. So those are things that international agencies like IPI and others, and regional organizations like ACM can make it. When you make noise like that, nobody's proud of being in that position. The drug dealer even himself has, you know, I'm sure you all know this, but some of those drug dealers think they're wonderful people and they're not doing awful things. But, you know, it's a matter of business, and they can't have these reporters messing up their business. But the more we've all demonstrated, Barbara's organization shows this so many times, the more sunlight you put on a problem, the less likely it is to persist. People around the world say they're in favor of press freedom. They're not always in favor of it, but the more you bring it to the attention that they're not doing what they say they do, the more likely it is it'll go through. Now, chilling effects, the more subtle versions of this are, there are leaders in governments who create a chilling effect by denigrating the press, or by having, when they have a press conference, they'll embarrass reporters. Or they do things to make it look to certain members of the public that the press is ill-intentioned or incompetent, or just silly buggers. You know, whatever they can do to make it look like. Why would you want to read the newspaper, listen to the evening news, or turn on your radio news? You wouldn't want to do it because these people are incompetent. That's the opposite of what a political leader should be doing, because a political leader says he or she came to office to do what's right for the people, to make this country, this nation, this community, this county better than it was. Instead, when they start emasculating or limiting the ability of the press to function, they are shutting down a critic. So they're making it easier for them to work, but they're actually hurting the interests of the country, because no country really ends up being well served if the people who live in it aren't heard, and if the people who live in it don't have the most information they can to make decisions. And it doesn't mean that you went to Harvard, or the University of the West Indies, or you went anywhere for your education. People have certain innate intelligence, and it shouldn't be ignored. And it certainly is easy to get the concept of how reporters come to a story totally biased and wanting to hurt somebody. Well, if it's some president who's under fire and he lashes out that way, it's pretty bad form. But we can look back in our history at people, I think for the most part, even you go back and look at President Richard Nixon, who ended up being criticized quite validly for lots of things. He was still playing by the rules, in which he did not try to make the press look like the enemy here. He did have an enemies list, and he monitored everything that certain reporters were doing, and he tried to make life miserable for certain people, but you didn't see him standing up saying, I don't know what they were thinking about when they created this First Amendment, because you see what's happened. It's gone wild. These people are just doing awful things. He wasn't undermining the press. Later, though, we've had some people who have gone to those kinds of tactics, and it's just terrible. Now, another way to intimidate us and limit our press freedom is to go after strongly go after the people in government who are providing information to us. The United States and other countries have whistleblower laws that are supposed to protect people in the government, who work in the government, who see things that are improper and want to let them get some sunlight. Excuse me. Well, more and more people who've been doing that in the United States have been investigated, and charges and cases are being built against them. That dries up your sources. If you don't have sources, the government itself is rarely going to announce, you know, we were building this bridge over here and we had this concept and it just didn't work, and here are all the mistakes we made. We're correcting it, but this is what we did wrong, and we want everybody to understand that, you know, you look at what you did wrong and now you make some revisions and you move forward. No, their typical way is to say, the bridge has been under construction for 4 years. We thought it would take 2 years. Here's our new plan. Never mind what we did wrong.
Or the overruns.
Or the overruns. Oh, you know, this bridge has not only been taking 4 years to make, but the budget was $300,000, and of course, if you, the reporter, didn't happen to check back and find out what the project was supposed to be, was $300,000. We're not going to remind you that. And if you ask us today, well, what's the cost of it to date, we'll say, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. You know, and that is the number that person wakes up every morning going, I can't believe it. It's $562,000 today. It was $558 yesterday. They know that number like they know their birthday. Well, I'll have to get back with you on that. Let me see. What was it especially you wanted to know? Oh, I see. Right. So those are all limiting our press freedom. The way you do to work with these, though, is you really work with them. You're not going to be able to muscle somebody into telling you exactly what you want to do. So you have to talk to a lot of people. You have to work with every source you know. As a reporter, you are constantly, I assume, it's what I do all the time, you're meeting new people, and every time you meet new people, keep track of who you met, find out where they are. You never know as a reporter what kind of project you'll be working on next. You know, even if you're in a specialized field, sometimes your story even gets better if you're working on something that has to do with fisheries, say, you know, fisheries and tourism, obviously, are big economic issues, so it's perfectly reasonable to be a reporter in these communities and have reporters in the finance ministry and economists over at the university. And of course, the fishermen, if you're doing the fishing industries, so that you're not just hearing one level of information. Now, there's something else about chilling I wanted to mention to you, and I'm wondering if where this is. Okay. The Freedom of Information Act, of course, is something we have in the United States, and we have it at all levels, and this is designed for public documents to be made public. We also, in Florida, to just digress, you know, we have a thing called the Sunshine Laws. These Sunshine Laws say that reporters are supposed to be able to come to public meetings, and that actually members of government are not allowed to meet on official business in small groups and in closed groups. So recently we've had some cases where two members of a city government got together and hatched a plot. That violates the Sunshine Laws. So you have those laws, so you're supposed to have access, and you're also supposed to have access to documents that come out of these meetings. So the Sunshine Laws and the Freedom of Information Laws have this thing in common. They were started with good intentions, and they can be very valuable to us, but they are very cumbersome to work with. Almost never can you say, Freedom of Information Act, I would like this document, and tomorrow you get it and put it in your story, your broadcast for the 7 o'clock news. It takes forever to get these things. and then when you get them, the documents can be redacted. Well, you don't stop trying to get them. One of the tactics on the other side, the limiting of press freedom, is that they take forever to do it. You know, or if you don't come after them, they'll forget about it. I did a book on Paul Volcker, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who led the United States out of a terrible recession and terrible period of inflation. Inflation was so bad that people would buy things like cars because the resale value of the used car pretty soon would be more valuable than the sale of a new car, because the dollars were, the dollar was losing value rapidly. So the whole country was getting into a spin that was downward, and he put in some very tough practices to straighten out the economy. And as you all know, straightening out economies is not easy. I was in Jamaica while Mr. Siaga was trying to restructure. He talked about structural, what did he call it? Structural adjustment. I can't believe it. I wrote all those stories and I didn't really understand structural adjustment. You know?
Neither did he.
Neither did he. All we end up knowing is, what has happened is that the government's got out of whack, so we're going to have to, for one thing, we're going to have to sharply reduce lending, and we're going to increase, in some cases, the way to do it is increase interest rates. Am I running out of time? Okay. So, anyway, helps if you can figure out what structural adjustment is. I laugh at myself when I go back at it, and I say, God, I wrote those stories, they look all right, they're reasonable, I didn't get that one, couldn't get that concept. Many of us couldn't get it, and as Canute says, he didn't have it himself. But it was a popular term at the time. Anyway, when I was writing this book about Paul Volcker, I went for freedom of information to get certain records and so on. By the time I got the book ready to hand to the publisher, some of that stuff came back. And it was so weak, it was not even worth the effort. But the truth is, you don't know what will come out, and so you always want to try those things. And my belief also is the less you file Freedom of Information Acts, the less the mechanism will be oiled up and working. And so you're kind of giving away a part of press freedom that you shouldn't be giving away. So now, finally, in my last 2 seconds here, 2 minutes, I'll be a little more accurate on that. Sometimes you need help to fight against some monster that's trying to limit your press freedom. And sometimes you can't do it in your own town or your own county or your own island. If you have a community that itself, the whole country is 500,000 or 1 million people, to my eyes, it's easier to squeeze the press in a situation like that. So much of your life impinges on all the people you're interacting with that maybe you can't fight right down to the bone on that. But what you can do is, and I'm sure you know some of this, is you go to the ACM and you go to IPI, and you can go to institutions like the University of Miami, and you can go to press organizations in the United States, and you can get them talking about the problem. And the international organizations bring more and more attention to a situation, and almost no country wants to be held up to international ridicule. And it just is a matter of being subtle enough on your own case so that you don't damage yourself at home by going out asking for help. But if you talk to me or Wesley or Barbara or anybody in these organizations, they are sensitive to this thing, and there's a way to do it. Also, I am a big fan of social media. I mentioned to you I'm trying to figure out how to write a book about social media, and I want to hear at some point how you all are using social media in your work. But social media itself is a terrific way to put pressure on the rascals, and in these places where you can't really be identified as the whistleblower or the spark plug or the critic, then you have to think 3 or 4 times about how are you going to use social media. Obviously, I'm not going to be tweeting about the Prime Minister in Jamaica if I'm at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, saying awful rude things. But I might have ways of knowing other people who are elsewhere working on social media, and it might turn out that somebody at the University of Miami suddenly is starting to tweet things that in themselves are not brutally critical of the Prime Minister, but might raise a little bit of the of the curtain here and suggest certain things. So Twitter and Facebook, fabulous. And we find that from surveys, studies, and analysis, that the Facebook material and the Twitter stuff that has the most impact is some words with pictures. The visual impact is enormous. So, if you wanted, let's say we're to continue that analogy of talking about criticizing the Prime Minister, you don't have to have a picture of the Prime Minister to go with it. You can have a picture of anything that relates to whatever your issue is. I was thinking Here, I had at one point thought of PowerPoints. I look back at it, and I don't think the PowerPoints could have kept up with my motor mouth. But in any case, I was thinking of caricatures or drawings that I could use on the PowerPoint, and you can do that with social media very well. So I think I'm going to stop talking now. I hope you will come back and talk to us, and we can have a discussion here. And I hope what we've said to you rings some bells. So thank you very much.